In this video, we're going to cover a little bit more detail of all the settings and the features to machine within Cabinet Parts Pro version 9. So features to machine are the objects or the text that is highlighted or checked midway on the page. The only options that are viewed here of what we see is a combination of all of the selected defaults. If you go back to watch the video on the basics of settings, it will explain a little bit more about how these are. But going to a different cabinet type, as a base cabinet, we could see more options are selected. To add more features to machine, we could do so by going to Tools, then Settings. In the Settings window, the top left is the cabinet type that we are going to set the defaults for. So each feature to machine, or most features to machine, has a corresponding button that goes along with it. So for example, currently for a wall cabinet, only the items that are checked are going to get applied by default. As we see with the base cabinet, we have more options selected. Coming back to the wall cabinet, we can see that there are fewer objects selected. So with each feature to machine, again, most has a corresponding button. So we'll take a look at the shelf holes first, clicking the button, and this is the same button as checkbox that we have here. So we want to add, and we do want to have our machine drill our shelf holes. The layer name. This is the layer name that is used within tool pathing and how you are going to apply a cutter. And the cutting operations, you're going to be selecting the layer name to be able to essentially select the vectors or any holes that we have for drilling the shelf holes. That works the same with every feature that we have listed. So the same for the hinge holes, we have the layer name as well. So going back to the shelf holes, we'll just take a look at what we have here. So the spacing is set to be 1.25 inches. The depth is 1/2 inch. The inset from the front, that is the distance from the front of the cabinet face to the row of holes. And the inset from the back is the same as the front, only from the back. The distance down from the top and up from the bottom is the distance from where the holes start. And then obviously we got diameter is the diameter of the hole. Once and if you've made any changes, you would click Save. If you want these changes to be applied to every cabinet type, you would select Save for all types. We'll look at how these settings interact with the sheets and the nested parts. We'll close our settings. We will now enter in a cabinet. We have one wall cabinet entered into the list. We will calculate a nest. We now have and can see the shelf holes have a spacing of 1.25 inches, are inset from the front and inset from the back, and the 8 inches down from the top and the bottom. To modify settings, and what we do by going to Tools Settings, that is setting our global default settings for any newly entered cabinets. Going to Tools Settings will not affect any cabinets that are already in that list. So let's see how that interacts. I'm going to change the size of this to 12 wide. And we're going to make this just a little bit smaller so we could see the difference between the two. And before I hit Enter on that, I'm going to go to Tools, Settings. And for a wall cabinet, we're going to change the spacing or the distance down and up from the top and bottom to 1 inch. I will now add this cabinet to the list and calculate and nest. We could see that the setting change for the second added cabinet has been modified to match up to the setting that we just entered in, 1 inch from the top, 1 inch from the bottom, but our original cabinet that was entered was not affected. And again, that is because going to Tools, Settings, and any settings changes there are only going to affect newly entered cabinets. To modify a cabinet settings for a cabinet that is already in the list, you would right click, change the settings, we could specify our distance down and up, close, then renest. You can see that has now been affected in the cabinet that was in the list. So both cabinet parts have basically the same settings. So going to File, New, going to Tools, Settings, I'm going to make that change, revert it back, and change the shelf holes distance. I don't like it 1 inch, 6 inches seems to be a nice setting, so I'm going to set that option there. Clicking Save, then closing Settings. If I want to add blind dados or dados to a wall cabinet or a particular cabinet type, it is selecting the cabinet type you would like to have that feature applied to, selecting the blind dado, and we could come have a look at the settings for blind dados. Again, that is the layer name that it's being set to the inside layer name. The 2 is used to set the order of what they show up in the features to machine on the nesting side. So the blind is the distance in from the front. If we do not want to have a blind dado and be a full dado, you would hit 0. The width of the dado, if we wanted a full width dado, we would enter in 3/4 of an inch, and the depth is the depth of the dado. Allowance is how much wider to make that dado to allow for gluing. There are some more advanced options down below to be able to use scripting along with that. We'll save that for another video. Saving that cabinet type, or saving that settings change, closing, and close the settings. We will add this cabinet to the list, and notice that the blind dado is checked, so we're going to have the blind dado option and feature applied to this cabinet type. Selecting Calculate and Nest, we will now see that we have a blind dado or a dado for the top of that cabinet. The bottom of the cabinet does not have any dados being applied to it. That is because our material thickness is 3/4 of an inch, and the width in the thickness of that dado is 3/4. Now making the change only to this cabinet, changing settings, coming into the blind dado, and making the width, instead of 3/4, we will make that 3/8. Saving, closing, and closing the settings. Renesting to have that settings be applied. We now see that we have a dado that is 3/8 wide, and then on the top and the bottom we've had added rectangles here to create a tenon to fit into that 3/8 dado. So again, going to Tools, Settings is a global change to any newly added cabinets to our list. Those changes are not going to affect any settings to the cabinet or any cabinets that are already existing in the cabinet list. Hopefully this was a useful video. There will be more videos that describe in more details on the drawer holes and drawer functions and door functions that we have here.